The summer heat pressed against my skin as I unlocked the gate to my backyard paradise. 3 months had passed since I purchased this home, and the pool still took my breath away each morning, crystal blue water shimmering against pristine white concrete. After 15 years serving on the police force, I had finally found my sanctuary in Oakwood Estates. The retirement package had been generous, allowing me to fulfill my dream of owning a home with a pool in a well-maintained community. My brother Michael still worked as a detective downtown, and most of my closest friends remained on active duty. The connection to the department stayed strong despite hanging up my badge. We still met for beers every Thursday, sharing stories and keeping me in the loop about department happenings. The transition to civilian life had been smoother than expected, largely due to the welcoming nature of my new neighbors. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought over a homemade apple pie on my first weekend. The Johnsons across the street invited me to their barbecue. Tom and Sarah from 2 doors down helped me navigate garbage collection schedules and local services. The neighborhood exuded friendliness and community spirit that reminded me why I had spent my career protecting places just like this. During an evening chat with Tom, he mentioned the neighborhood association maintained strict standards. The HOA keeps everything looking perfect, he explained, gesturing to the manicured lawns and coordinated mailboxes. Just make sure you read the rule book before making any changes to your property. I nodded, appreciating the organized approach. Rules provided structure and structure created harmony. As a former officer, I understood this better than most. The idea struck me during the department's monthly newsletter review. The Fallen Officers Family Fund needed additional support after 3 officers had died in the line of duty this year. Their families faced financial challenges beyond the standard benefits package. What better way to help than hosting a fundraiser at my new home? The pool provided the perfect setting for a summer gathering that could bring the community together while supporting a cause close to my heart. I shared my plans with neighbors during an impromptu gathering at the community mailboxes. I am thinking about hosting a pool party fundraiser for the families of fallen officers, I explained. Nothing too elaborate, just swimming, food, and collecting donations. Most responded with enthusiasm. Emma clapped her hands together. What a wonderful idea, count us in. Tom nodded. Great way to bring the neighborhood together for a good cause. Only one person remained silent. A tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair watching our conversation from a slight distance. Her arms crossed tightly across her chest, creating deep wrinkles in her expensive blouse. That sounds like a lovely idea, she finally said, her voice lacking the warmth of the others. But have you checked the HOA regulations regarding gatherings? I am Diane Winters, the association president. Her lips formed a tight smile that never reached her calculating eyes. Pool parties require proper authorization. We have strict noise and capacity limitations. I will make sure to follow all proper procedures, I assured her. See that you do. She turned away, her designer shoes clicking against the pavement. The board takes violations very seriously. As I watched her walk toward the largest house on the block, Tom leaned close. Watch yourself with that one, he whispered. Diane runs the HOA like her personal kingdom. Nothing happens here without her approval, and she does not approve of much. I thanked him for the warning but felt unconcerned. After dealing with hardened criminals for 15 years, how difficult could one neighborhood association president be? Little did I know that beneath our pristine community lurked a power structure that would test my patience, determination, and ultimately my connections in ways I never anticipated. The HOA handbook arrived via certified mail 3 days later. The thick spiral-bound document landed on my kitchen counter with a substantial thud. Flipping through the pages revealed an exhaustive list of regulations covering everything from acceptable mailbox designs to the specific shade of white permitted for window trim. The pool section alone spanned 12 pages of meticulous restrictions. No pool usage before 10:00 a.m. or after 6:00 p.m. Maximum occupancy limited to 8 guests without special board approval. No amplified music within 50 feet of the water. No food or beverages permitted within 20 feet of the pool edge. All gatherings exceeding 8 persons require written board authorization submitted 14 days in advance. I highlighted the relevant sections and completed the required forms with painstaking detail. My fundraiser proposal included exact times, estimated attendance, noise mitigation plans, and safety measures. I submitted everything in triplicate as required, then waited for the monthly HOA meeting where my request would be reviewed. The community center buzzed with quiet conversation when I arrived. Approximately 20 homeowners occupied folding chairs arranged in neat rows, facing a long table where 5 board members sat. Diane occupied the center position, her posture impeccable as she called the meeting to order. My proposal appeared last on the agenda. By the time Diane reached it, her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against the table. Next item, Michael Roberts requests authorization for a pool party fundraiser. She pronounced the words as if describing something distasteful. The event would benefit families of officers killed in the line of duty, I explained, standing to address the room. All proceeds go directly to the fallen officer's family fund. Diane examined my application through narrowed eyes. Your submission fails to account for Section 8.3 regarding external organization involvement. Additionally, the noise mitigation plan lacks specificity required by Addendum 12B. I blinked in confusion. I reviewed all regulations carefully. Perhaps not carefully enough. Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness. Section 8.3 was updated last month. The revised guidelines were emailed to all residents. Other board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. A gray-haired man at the end of the table cleared his throat. Perhaps we could approve conditionally, Diane. It is for charity after all. Diane shot him a sharp look before returning her attention to me. Rules exist for a reason, Gerald. Without them, we invite chaos. The meeting adjourned without a decision on my application. As residents filed out, Tom approached me with an apologetic expression. Told you she was difficult. Diane has blocked every community gathering proposal for 3 years unless she organizes it herself. Why does everyone tolerate this? I asked. Her parties get automatic approval. Last summer she had live music until midnight, but when the Millers asked to host their daughter's graduation party, she shut them down for potential noise violations. Tom lowered his voice. Between us, she especially hates anything involving police. Got 3 citations last year for noise and parking violations during her garden parties. She filed complaints against the responding officers, claimed harassment. This information shifted my perspective. The fundraiser suddenly represented more than charity. It became a test of reasonable governance versus petty tyranny. I spent the next week gathering support, collecting signatures from 15 neighbors endorsing my event. At the special review session, I presented this documentation alongside revised plans addressing every conceivable regulation. Diane could not outright deny my request given the community support, but her response proved equally effective. The board approves your fundraiser with the following conditions: attendance limited to 20 persons including residents, no street parking permitted, No amplified sound whatsoever. Mandatory quiet hours beginning at 4:00 p.m. Full compliance with all existing pool regulations. The restrictions would effectively render the fundraiser pointless. 20 people could barely generate meaningful donations. Without street parking, even that limited attendance became impossible. Quiet hours starting at 4:00 p.m. would force early conclusion when most attendees would just be arriving after work. These conditions seem designed specifically to ensure failure, I observed. They ensure compliance, Diane corrected, her smile sharp as a knife. Take it or leave it. I accepted the conditions without argument, recognizing the bureaucratic bullying tactic for what it was. As I left the meeting, determination solidified within me. This woman had underestimated who she was dealing with. 15 years in law enforcement had taught me that knowing the precise rules often revealed exactly how to outmaneuver those who weaponized them. The truth about Diane Winters unfolded gradually through conversations with longtime residents. Each interaction revealed another piece of the puzzle. Mrs. Henderson provided the first substantial insight while we chatted over her garden fence. Diane received multiple citations last year, she confirmed, glancing nervously toward the HOA president's colonial-style home. Not just noise complaints. She had guests parking across sidewalks during her summer soirees. When officers came to address neighbor complaints, she treated them horribly, demanded to speak with supervisors, claimed harassment, even threatened lawsuits. I contacted my former partner, Officer Rodriguez, who verified the incidents. That address is flagged in our system, he explained during our weekly coffee meetup. Your HOA president filed 3 formal NTS against responding officers. The department investigated and dismissed all claims, but she bombarded the chief with angry calls for weeks afterward. That explains her reaction to my fundraiser, I noted, pieces connecting in my mind. Rodriguez nodded. She probably associates police presence with her personal embarrassment. Some people cannot separate the badge from their negative experiences. Further investigation revealed Diane's enforcement patterns followed clear favoritism. Residents who supported her board decisions received warnings for violations, while those who questioned her authority faced immediate fines. The Thompson family received a $250 penalty for leaving their garbage bin visible from the street, while board member Gerald's bin regularly remained out for days without consequence. Most disturbing was my discovery in the community center archives. While reviewing publicly available HOA documents during posted office hours, I found a folder containing dozens of complaint forms filed by Diane against families who had challenged her decisions. The Millers, who had requested the graduation party, subsequently received violations for landscaping irregularities that had existed for years without issue. Despite mounting evidence of her tyrannical approach, I proceeded with my fundraiser plans. The cause remained too important to abandon. I adjusted my strategy to work within, or around, her impossible restrictions. First, I sent formal invitations to neighbors and the entire police department, carefully noting the HOA's attendance limitations while emphasizing the fundraiser's charitable purpose. I specified that, while physical attendance might be restricted, donations remained welcome from anyone supporting the cause. Next, I connected with Officer Rodriguez and other former colleagues about our predicament. They suggested involving higher-ranking department officials to elevate the event's profile. The community relations sergeant expressed particular interest, seeing potential for positive public engagement during a time when police-community relations faced challenges nationwide. Each morning, Diane conducted what she likely considered subtle surveillance of my property. My security cameras captured her walking past at precisely 8:17 a.m., smartphone raised to document any potential violations. Her attempts to find fault grew increasingly desperate as the event approached. One morning she photographed my grass with an actual ruler, apparently checking if it exceeded the mandated 3-inch maximum height. Another day, she inspected my mailbox from multiple angles, likely searching for unauthorized modifications. Her scrutiny intensified when she noticed police department vehicles occasionally parked in my driveway during planning meetings. After one such meeting, she appeared at my door clutching a dog-eared copy of the HOA handbook. Your visitors exceed the permitted frequency outlined in Section 4.2, she declared without greeting. The handbook clearly states that recurring visitors constitute potential residential business activity requiring special permits. These are personal friends discussing a charity event already approved by the board, I responded calmly. No business is conducted. Her eyes narrowed. The distinction seems conveniently blurry. I am watching your compliance very carefully, Mr. Roberts. As she turned to leave, I noticed her photographing my porch light. Is there a problem with my fixture? I asked. Just documenting. Your bulb appears to exceed the approved wattage and color temperature. She smiled thinly. Details matter in our community. The interaction confirmed what neighbors had warned. Diane would use any technicality to undermine my event. What had begun as a simple charitable gathering had transformed into something more significant, a necessary stand against petty tyranny that had infected our otherwise pleasant community. That evening, I received text messages from 3 neighbors warning that Diane had questioned them about my disruptive plans and implied that supporting my event might result in increased HOA scrutiny of their properties. Rather than discouraging support, her threats galvanized the community. 2 residents who had initially declined my invitation now confirmed their attendance, specifically citing Diane's intimidation tactics as motivation. The fundraiser was no longer just about supporting fallen officers' families. It had evolved into a test of whether one person's abuse of authority could override a community's right to reasonable self-determination. As I finalized preparations, I realized the stakes had grown far beyond what I had initially envisioned. 24 hours before the fundraiser, chaos erupted in suspiciously calculated ways. My morning shower sputtered and weakened, water pressure dropping dramatically overnight. Outside, temporary no parking signs had appeared on surrounding streets, each bearing official-looking HOA letterhead, but lacking permit numbers or municipal authorization codes. Tom knocked on my door before I could address either issue. Thought you should know, Diane called an emergency board meeting last night. Closed session, no residents allowed. His expression conveyed serious concern. Gerald told me she pushed through a temporary noise restriction for tomorrow, citing infrastructure maintenance that nobody has actually seen scheduled. I thanked him for the information, my suspicions confirming that these obstacles were deliberately orchestrated. The water pressure issue particularly concerned me, as maintaining proper pool chemistry required functional water flow. A call to the utility company revealed no scheduled maintenance or reported issues in our neighborhood. Your internal house valve might be partially closed, the service representative suggested. Sometimes they get adjusted during inspections. No inspections had occurred recently, except Diane's frequent property surveillance. Checking the main water valve in my garage revealed it had indeed been tampered with, turned to restrict flow. The valve box showed subtle scratches indicating it had been opened by someone unfamiliar with its mechanism. As I restored proper water pressure, an unmarked envelope slid under my front door. Inside, a single typed message: Diane plans to call in noise complaints the moment your party begins. Rather than feeling defeated, a strange calm settled over me. 15 years in law enforcement had taught me to recognize when someone had overplayed their hand. Diane's escalating interference crossed from petty bureaucratic bullying into potentially illegal territory. Tampering with utilities, posting unauthorized parking restrictions, and filing false police reports all carried consequences beyond HOA politics. I contacted the police department directly, not to complain about Diane, but to coordinate logistics as an event organizer. The community relations sergeant I had been working with unexpectedly transferred me to the chief's office. "Michael Roberts, Chief Williams here. Rodriguez speaks highly of you." The chief's authoritative voice carried through the phone. "I understand you're organizing a fundraiser for the Fallen Officers Fund." "Yes, sir, though we're facing some local challenges with the HOA." A brief chuckle preceded his response. "So I've heard. Listen, the mayor mentioned interest in attending community events supporting first responders. Would you mind if we both stopped by? Nothing formal, just showing support." This development transformed my modest gathering into something Diane could not so easily dismiss. When the mayor appeared at community functions, local media often followed. The fundraiser's profile had just elevated beyond anything she could shut down with HOA technicalities. That afternoon, my security cameras captured Diane circling my property with a measuring tape, methodically documenting the distance between my pool and the property line. When she noticed me watching, she approached my driveway with clipboard in hand. "Just confirming your compliance with setback requirements," she explained with cold professionalism. "Section 12.4 requires all event equipment to maintain minimum clearance from property boundaries." "Everything will be properly positioned," I assured her. "See that it is." Her voice hardened. "Even your honored guests must follow our community standards." Our conversation ended there, but the confrontation continued through official channels. That evening, a formal letter bearing the HOA letterhead appeared on my door, threatening immediate legal action and substantial fines for any violations during tomorrow's event. The letter listed 16 specific regulations requiring strict compliance, several of which contradicted guidelines in the actual handbook. As I reviewed these final intimidation attempts, I felt oddly serene. The storm clouds had gathered, but instead of anxiety, I experienced the focused clarity that had served me well during critical operations throughout my police career. Diane had created a situation where her own tactics would ultimately expose her abuse of power. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation she seemed determined to provoke, but the outcome would likely differ dramatically from what she anticipated. Dawn broke clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of the day's purpose. I rose early, completing pool chemical adjustments before the permitted 10:00 a.m. start time. 3 volunteers arrived precisely at the allowed hour: Tom, Emma, and Mrs. Henderson, each eager to help prepare for the fundraiser that had become a community cause. "We removed those fake parking signs," Tom mentioned casually as he helped arrange tables. Gerald confirmed no permits were issued for temporary restrictions. Emma hung blue ribbons commemorating fallen officers along the fence, while Mrs. Henderson organized the donation station. Every detail followed regulations meticulously. Speakers positioned to direct sound away from neighboring properties. Tables placed exactly 20 feet from the pool edge. attendance list prepared for strict verification. At 11:30 a.m., the first official guests arrived. Officer Rodriguez and his family brought homemade empanadas and a generous donation check. Two other officers from my former precinct followed shortly after, arriving in civilian clothes with their families. Children immediately gravitated toward the pool where I had arranged professional lifeguard supervision, another precaution that exceeded requirements but ensured complete safety compliance. Diane's surveillance began immediately. Through gaps in the fence, I glimpsed her watching from her second-floor window, camera phone clearly visible. Occasionally she emerged onto her back deck, pointing what appeared to be a sound level meter toward my property. Her documentation efforts seemed increasingly frustrated as she found no legitimate violations to record. At precisely noon, the event transformed completely. Two black SUVs pulled into my driveway, followed by a police department cruiser with lights flashing briefly before shutting down. The chief emerged from the first vehicle in casual clothes, accompanied by the mayor in a polo shirt bearing the city logo. From the second SUV stepped the county commissioner and the head of the police union. The cruiser delivered the community relations team, who carried professional camera equipment to document the department's community engagement efforts. Neighbors gathered in astonishment as these distinguished guests entered my backyard. What had been designed as a modest fundraiser suddenly evolved into a noteworthy community relations showcase. The mayor shook hands warmly with residents while the chief engaged children with stories about police work, emphasizing safety and service. This is exactly the kind of community police partnership we need to showcase, the commissioner announced, gesturing for the department photographer to capture the moment. Grassroots support for our officers' families demonstrates what makes our county special. Donation totals climbed rapidly past our most optimistic projections. The presence of municipal leadership attracted additional neighbors who had initially hesitated to attend. Several residents from adjacent streets arrived having heard about the event through community networks. While I carefully monitored attendance to remain technically compliant with HOA restrictions, the gathering's significance had clearly exceeded anything Diane could diminish through petty enforcement. Diane emerged from her home repeatedly, her surveillance growing increasingly conspicuous. She photographed license plates of parked cars, measured the distance between guests standing near property lines, and documented each person entering my gate. Her frustration visibly mounted as the event proceeded without providing legitimate violations she could leverage. The gathering reached its emotional peak when the chief delivered a brief speech about community solidarity and officer sacrifice. The families left behind when an officer falls need more than official benefits, he explained to the attentive crowd. They need to know their community remembers and cares. Events like this provide tangible support while showing them they are not alone. During the applause following his remarks, I noticed movement at the edge of the gathering. Diane stood partially concealed behind my neighbor's hedge, phone pressed against her ear. Her animated gestures and frequent pointing toward my property confirmed my suspicions. The anonymous note had been correct. She was calling to report the very gathering that police leadership was currently attending. Her expression shifted from determined to triumphant as she completed the call and returned to her observation position. She clearly believed she had successfully outmaneuvered me by contacting officers outside our immediate jurisdiction, those unaware of the fundraiser's official status and distinguished attendees. I caught Officer Rodriguez's eye and nodded toward Diane's position. He understood immediately, quietly alerting the chief about the situation. Rather than concern, the chief's face showed amusement as he received the information. He whispered something to the mayor, who struggled to suppress a smile while nodding in agreement. "How long before response do you think?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Knowing our dispatcher, she will recognize the address and send someone immediately, especially with the noise complaint code Diane probably used. Rodriguez grinned. This should be interesting. The fundraiser continued with swimming, conversation, and growing donations. Behind this normal activity, a subtle anticipation built among those aware of what was coming. The chief positioned himself casually near the front gate, ostensibly enjoying a hamburger while monitoring the street beyond. The mayor engaged nearby residents in conversation about community improvements, maintaining a clear view of the driveway. 20 minutes after Diane's call, the distinctive sound of approaching sirens briefly cut through the afternoon air before falling silent. 2 patrol cars turned onto my street, lights flashing but without audible sirens. As they pulled into my driveway, I noticed Diane emerge from between houses, straightening her designer blouse as she prepared to intercept the responding officers. The confrontation she had meticulously engineered was about to unfold, though certainly not as she had envisioned. 2 patrol cars pulled into my driveway, light bars still flashing but sirens silent. Before the officers could even exit their vehicles, Diane charged across my front lawn, her designer heels puncturing the soft grass. Her face displayed righteous indignation as she approached the first patrol car. "Thank goodness you are here," she called loudly, deliberately projecting her voice to attract attention from guests. "This man is violating multiple HOA regulations and city noise ordinances. I want this unauthorized gathering shut down immediately." Officer Jenkins stepped from the first patrol car, removing his sunglasses slowly. His partner emerged from the passenger side, both looking confused as they surveyed the scene. From my position near the gate, I could see the exact moment recognition dawned on Jenkins' face as he spotted his captain among my guests. "Ma'am, we received a noise complaint," Jenkins stated professionally, though his eyes continued scanning the gathering of police department personnel and city officials. "Yes, that was my call," Diane confirmed, pointing accusingly toward my backyard. "This event violates our HOA restrictions on gatherings. The noise levels exceed permitted decibels, and attendance far surpasses authorized limits." Her voice carried across the yard, deliberately drawing attention to the confrontation. Guests had begun migrating toward the front yard, curious about the patrol cars. The chief nodded to Officer Jenkins, a subtle acknowledgement between colleagues. Jenkins maintained his professional demeanor despite the increasingly awkward situation. "We will need to investigate the complaint, ma'am," he explained, gesturing for his partner to follow as they approached my gate. "Standard procedure." Diane followed closely, her triumphant expression suggesting she anticipated immediate enforcement action. "The HOA has strict regulations about—" She stopped mid-sentence as she registered the presence of the police chief and mayor among my guests. Her face transitioned rapidly from satisfaction to confusion to horrified realization. Officer Jenkins addressed the chief directly. "Sorry to interrupt, sir. We received a noise complaint about this address." "No interruption at all, Jenkins," the chief replied casually. "Just enjoying a community fundraiser for the Fallen Officers Fund. Your invitation mentioned you were on duty today, so we saved you some food." The mayor stepped forward, extending his hand to the officers. "Excellent response time, gentlemen. Always good to see our department taking community concerns seriously." Diane stood frozen, her carefully constructed narrative collapsing around her. The responding officers had been invited to the very event she reported. Her complaint had inadvertently delivered additional police department representation to the fundraiser she had tried desperately to undermine. "There must be some mistake," she stammered, struggling to regain composure. "This gathering exceeds the HOA-approved attendance limit of 20 persons, and the noise levels clearly—" "Actually," I interjected calmly, "we have maintained exact compliance with HOA restrictions. Each person here either counts as household occupancy, approved guest within limits, or falls under the Emergency Services Personnel Exemption in Section 9.3 of the HOA Guidelines." The chief raised an eyebrow. "Emergency Services Exemption." "Yes, sir," I confirmed. "The HOA bylaws specifically exempt emergency services personnel attending in advisory capacity from occupancy restrictions. Originally intended for fire inspectors and emergency preparedness demonstrations, but the language encompasses police department community relations activities." Diane's face flushed crimson. "That exemption was never intended." "The language is quite clear," interrupted Emma, who had emerged from the crowd holding her own copy of the HOA handbook. Normally quiet during association meetings, she now stood firm. "I have served on the document review committee for 6 years. The exemption was deliberately written to encourage safety officials' community engagement." Other neighbors stepped forward, forming a loose semicircle around Diane. Tom spoke next, addressing the officers dire. "CTLY. Ms. Winters has systematically weaponized HOA regulations against residents who challenge her authority. This fundraiser became her target specifically because it involves police department participation." "That is absolutely false," Diane protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Henderson, typically the neighborhood's most diplomatic voice, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Last year, Diane received 3 citations during her garden parties. Since then, she has blocked every community event involving police personnel while approving her own gatherings that violate the same regulations she enforces against others." Officer Jenkins exchanged glances with his partner before addressing Diane. "Ma'am, we need to complete our noise complaint investigation. Standard procedure requires sound level measurement from the property line." The officers conducted their assessment with professional thoroughness, confirming that all noise levels fell within city ordinance limits. Their official finding effectively nullified Diane's complaint, leaving her without recourse as neighbors continued sharing stories of her selective enforcement practices. Desperate to salvage some authority, Diane pivoted to technical violations. "The pool safety regulations require additional lifeguards for this many children," she declared, pointing toward the swimming area. "We have 3 certified lifeguards present," I countered, "triple the requirement for our current occupancy." The parking arrangement clearly violates Section 5.2. "All vehicles are either in designated driveway spaces or properly registered guest spots," Tom interrupted. "We confirmed compliance before the event began." Diane's accusations grew increasingly desperate. "The donation collection constitutes unauthorized commercial activity in a residential zone." The mayor stepped forward. "Actually, Ms. Winters, as city commissioner, I can confirm that registered charitable fundraising is explicitly permitted in all residential zones under Municipal Code 47.3. I should know. I helped write that ordinance." With each failed accusation, Diane's position weakened. Neighbors who had suffered under her arbitrary enforcement for years found their collective voice. Gerald, the gray-haired board member who had suggested conditional approval during my initial application, finally approached the group. As HOA Vice President, I believe we should revisit our application process, he announced. Recent events suggest our current leadership approach may not reflect community values or support homeowner interests. Diane stared at him in disbelief. You cannot simply. Article 12 permits emergency board reviews when questions of leadership integrity arise, Gerald continued firmly. I believe we have reached that threshold. Diane's final desperate accusation targeted the fundraiser itself. The permit for collecting charitable donations requires municipal authorization that I doubt was obtained. The police chief smiled thinly. The department officially sponsors this event, Ms. Winters. All permits were processed through my office directly. He gestured toward the donation table where the required documentation was prominently displayed. Neighbors who had tolerated Diane's tyranny for years now witnessed her complete public unraveling. Community solidarity crystallized not against an outside threat, but against the enemy within our gates who had abused power for personal vendettas. As Diane recognized her defeat, her expression shifted from anger to something resembling fear, the realization that her actions had consequences beyond her control. The setting sun cast long shadows across my backyard as the confrontation reached its inevitable conclusion. Diane stood alone, the neighbors who had once feared her authority now unified against her abuses. Without further protests, she turned and walked stiffly back to her home, whispers following her retreat. The responding officers completed their official report documenting the unfounded noise complaint before accepting plates of food and joining the fundraiser they had been invited to attend weeks earlier. Rather than dampening the event, the confrontation energized the gathering. Donations doubled as word spread through the neighborhood about what had transpired. The chief circulated among guests, sharing stories about fallen officers' families who would benefit from the community's generosity. The mayor used the opportunity to discuss community policing initiatives, turning the incident into a positive example of residents and law enforcement working together. As volunteers helped clean up that evening, conversations naturally turned to governance and the future of our community. Tom approached me carrying folding chairs toward my garage. Gerald called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. 3 members already submitted resignations after what happened today. Emma joined us, adding, the board cannot ignore this anymore. Diane has ruled through intimidation for too long. We need new leadership that actually represents homeowners rather than controlling them. Before I could respond, several neighbors gathered around us. You should run for the board, Michael, Mrs. Henderson suggested. After standing up to Diane, people would definitely support you. I am not a politician, I protested. I just wanted to host a fundraiser. That is exactly why you would be perfect, Tom insisted. Someone who cares about community rather than power. Despite my reluctance, their arguments proved persuasive. The following week, I found myself nominated for a board position alongside 4 other residents who shared visions of more balanced governance. The emergency election saw record homeowner participation, a clear referendum on the previous leadership style. The final fundraising total exceeded our goal by over $12,000, enough to establish a permanent scholarship for children of fallen officers in addition to immediate family support. The department publicly recognized our community's contribution during their annual memorial service, cementing positive relationships between Oakwood Estates and local law enforcement. In the weeks that followed, reasonable board members approached me with conciliatory gestures. Gerald, who retained his vice president position, explained their previous silence. We were afraid to challenge her. Diane kept dossiers on anyone who opposed her decisions, looking for violations to selectively enforce. Working together, the new board began revising HOA guidelines to ensure equitable enforcement and reasonable interpretations. We established clear appeals processes and transparency requirements that prevented any single individual from weaponizing regulations against personal targets. 6 months after the confrontation, a for sale sign appeared in front of Diane's colonial home. She conducted the move during midweek when most residents were at work, departing without goodbyes or forwarding address. The new owners, a young family with 2 children, expressed amazement at how welcoming the community proved to be. "We heard HOAs could be difficult," they confessed during their housewarming party, an event approved without controversy under the revised guidelines. "But everyone here has been incredibly friendly and helpful." 1 year after my initial fundraiser, we hosted the second annual police department benefit. With proper permits displayed prominently and revised HOA guidelines in place, twice as many attendees enjoyed a perfect summer day around my pool. The event expanded to include neighboring communities, raising over $30,000 for the Fallen Officers Fund. As I watched children playing in the water while their parents chatted with uniformed officers, I reflected on how a simple charitable impulse had catalyzed meaningful community change. The confrontation with Diane had been uncomfortable but necessary, exposing systemic problems that could only be addressed once they became visible to everyone. Officer Rodriguez joined me by the grill, surveying the successful gathering. "Not bad for a retirement project," he observed with a smile. "Turned out you were still fighting for justice, just in a different uniform." The new HOA guidelines now adorn the community center wall, their preamble emphasizing reasonable enforcement and transparent governance. The final paragraph expressed the lesson we had learned together. Community strength derives not from rigid control, but from respectful collaboration. Sometimes justice arrives not through courts or formal complaints, but through neighborhoods finally finding their collective voice against those who abuse power. The statement perfectly captured what we had discovered through conflict and resolution, that true community forms when people stand together against bullying and arbitrary authority. My retirement had taken an unexpected turn toward community leadership, but the principles remained the same as those that had guided my police career: protection, service, and the simple belief that rules should serve people rather than the other way around.